large topic. Any of you who are working on biophilia or biomorphism, but I have gone through quite a number of things. I have had the help of Kelly Kang, who's also taking this class remotely. She's in Irvine. And what I'll try to do is, I really feel I've only sort of begun to understand the problem. It is a problem. And the reason biomorphism and biophilia are a problem is because people do enjoy plants. They do enjoy greenery. They do enjoy nature. When people are put in nature, it has a restorative effect. I will report data in a second. And so the obvious temptation is to say that the cause of these positive things is something called nature, some aspect. Then you say, what's nature, right? You know, so then you have to start exploring, well, what's nature? And maybe it's the colors of nature, maybe it's the materials of nature, maybe it's the brightness of nature, maybe it's the rhythm of nature. Nature is such a big thing. We're part of nature. Maybe it's the presence of other people. Isn't that nature? We're animals. They talk about having animals in the environment. So the thing is, when you begin to explore what are the causes of the positive effects, you want to decompose the big word called nature into separate components. But if they're separate components, surely they don't have to be from nature. I mean, light. Does nature own light when people are talking about biological biophilia? Does nature own that? It's light. And similarly, sound, and similarly, other things. So if you were designing architecture and you knew specifically if I manipulate the light in certain ways, or I manipulate the sound in certain ways, or I manipulate the colors in certain ways, why are we attributing that to biophilia? And that, it seems to me, is the big problem. On the other hand, the guy who introduced the first concept, a very distinguished and an elegant gentleman, great contributor last century, who did fundamental work on ants, the ethologist E.O. Wilson at Harvard. He proposed biophilia, and he suggested that humans like it because we're evolutionarily adapted to it. That's what we're expecting. That's our natural environment. This is not our natural environment. See, this stuff is not our natural environment. But no, I could argue that it's biomorphic because those tiles have a certain fractal nature to them. They're kind of noisy in the way they are distributed, the holes. But that this is not what humans were adapted to for 99% of their history. And so when you recreate what we're adapted to in 99% of our genetic history, and it goes back to chimps and goes back to things, then you're going to find it's nature in some big sense, right? So that argues as if it's a theory, that's kind of theoretical justification that's going to unify these other attributes. But it's very hard to show that genetically we're predisposed to these things. So you don't do it by genetically predisposition. You try to show that there is a neural effect. So you do behavioral studies, and you say, you see, here's with the attributes that we call biophilic, here's without the attributes that we call biophilic. We're going to measure it in the following way. We're going to subject people to certain conditions, and we're going to see if there's some measurable effect. And indeed, many and often they find measurable effects. Often they don't. And then we say, well, okay, we have this empirical evidence, but we don't know why. And so now we need a theory. And one of the types of theory is to go down and see if we can give a deeper explanation in terms of what's going on in the brain. And so naturally, people like to go to something like saying, well, you know, what happens is people operating in environments often are stressed by certain environments, and they're less stressed by others. And in some environments, they're positively restored. And so we say, okay, well, how do we measure that? And then there are various measures. And one of these things, we can measure stress, and we can measure sort of the enduring effects of stress called allostatic load. And then we can see if we throw people into this environment, does it relieve or reduce the allostatic load? And so then that's the idea that people are going after to try to really establish that there is a biophilic, that the biophilic conjecture can be made sense of, and we can empirically support it. I think the jury is still out, but there are very positive signs that something's going on here. And I will now, with that as a preface, try to begin the exploration, which I would regard to be very basic so far, basic not in the best sense of basic meaning fundamental. I would say early days for me to try to understand this topic. Sorry. Okay, so I'll mention what I think I'll try to classify biophilic design, biomorphic design. We'll talk about stress and evidence and restoration, and we can have a discussion. So here is E.O. Wilson, Edmund Wilson, with his aunts, famous insectologist, and he says, biophilic, the integration of natural elements into a built environment to create a more human-centric space that connects its inhabitants to nature. The implication being that this is human-centric in the sense that the magnitudes are right. There are some buildings you go into where the magnitudes are not right? You go in, and in fact, fascist architecture is gigantic architecture with massive, heavy things. You go up all these steps, and then you go inside, and you're so small, and it's so imposing, and you don't know quite where to go. That architecture, which was in Italy and in Germany, and arises, whenever you need to have the power of the state in people's eyes, because the implication of fascist architecture is that humans, you individuals, are very tiny. You do not have power. The state has power. And so when you come in here, you understand you should be in awe before the state. Okay, now might be argued not to be human scale. I don't know, are we supposed to be in burrows? What is human scale? But nonetheless, he says human-centric, and it connects its inhabitants to nature. And this connection to nature is innate, and we're genetically programmed to respond to it physiologically and psychologically. Okay, so that's Wilson. Another person who began to develop it, and I think he's an architect. I think he's an architect. So yeah, they're architects. So he came up with his name is strongly associated with it's before this, but he was articulated in one of these papers. This is a good one. He said, look, there are three big parts of biophilic design. There's somehow the direct experience of nature, which we do not have in this room, except us, which are never considered to be nature, particularly. I guess, no, I have natural materials. I like natural materials, but they are not direct. They don't count these as direct, they count. Then there's an indirect experience of nature that counts as materials and things like this. And then it's supposed to evoke. You can have the part that evokes a sense of nature. And all of that are these biophilic elements that we could put into design. And so we'll look at some of those now. So the direct experience of nature, it has real natural elements. Okay, so that would be light. So that's a biophilic element we have in this room. Water, we have none of that. But if you focus on light, then you say, well, are you getting natural light in all the parts of the space? Can you always look and see some natural light, and so on? I'm extrapolating. I don't know that the principles are well stated as to how you go from what counts as a biophilic principle into how to do biophilic design. But I would have thought that, you see, suppose I had a light over there, I can't see it, but it's casting onto the wall. So the wall is reflecting natural light, even though it reflects it, mediated by the paint. So does that count? And, these are all issues which, if you are an architect or a theorist of architecture, you have to try to operationalize or make into definite. An operational definition is something which is a procedure you can apply, and it says yes or no, or it tells you how to take this into that. It's some kind of function, either a decision function or a mapping function. So light, water, fountains, ponds, aquariums, and it has, in this case, it said auditory experiences of water. So those little things. Plants, obviously, green walls are the green walls we now talk about, where they actually have plants on them. Animals, bird feeders, butterfly gardens, natural landscapes. These are views of natural, even though they're outside, so through the window, that counts. And then air, that mimic natural breezes and promote fresh air. So, okay, good. So that's that. Now let's see some examples. Personally, I think this is grotesque, but it satisfies the conditions. And again, I want to just remind you, in the history of architecture, during the modernist period, when the architecture was greatly influenced by the notions of simplicity and the elegance of natural geometric form, then people like Mies van der Rohe would design really simple geometric structures, well proportioned, but he was the person who said less is more. God is in the details. And what he meant by God is in the details is that it's the quality of work. It's the materials you use. It's the care, the craftsmanship in something that is going to elevate something that could be as simple as a basic rectanguloid like this, and wrong proportions for me, but elevate it into something wonderful. Now, so here's this guy. He believes in, let's say, big rectangular spaces, higher ceiling than this, usually marble if it was a bank or an apartment block or anything. A beautiful marble, expensive marble, beautiful flooring, all of that. Imagine this guy, very little furniture. Imagine this guy putting a plant in that space. He'd roll over. The idea of putting a plant in the simplicity of that space, a plant with all those leaves. I don't know. You should look at plants lately. I have been, because I'm trying to figure out how to put the right plants behind me for in my workspace, and it's Zoom. And the other day I was looking at it and I thought, I don't like all those leaves. There are too many leaves. So then I tried to find plants with fewer leaves and stuff. But all those leaves. Just because it's natural doesn't mean, or just because it's filled with plants doesn't mean it's happy, I think. And there was a long-standing tradition against it, not because they were against plants, but because they were against the visual complexity introduced into those pristine spaces. So here we have more. Here we have plants and water. It's outside, but it also is inside. This is very nice in the sense of inside and outside, and it's what we can do here in California. It's, one of the virtues of living in a place like this. You don't need to have, one could have those two back doors open in part of the year, except for the sound, and that's part of the lovely space. The Salk Institute, inside, outside. Many of the great buildings have a lot of inside, outside. People have big doors that go like that, and they don't have to close them So this is one thing here. Here we have plants, light coming from there, light coming from there, light coming from there. It's not a particularly gorgeous place, but they did the best they could, and the way they did that was they have, if you think bricks are natural material, if you think stones are natural material, then they have that. You know, not everybody would think that's natural, you know, right? Okay, here we have plants and water. So yes, there's the sound. This is a classic kind of, could be Europe. Yeah, it's not England, it's Europe somewhere. Now here we have a natural waterscape, and yet there's not that much natural about this if you're thinking about nature, meaning the old, like came from. So a lot of these have been contrived, some of these. I mean, these were, Venice is built on a bunch of islands. So yes, there was water all around here, but certainly that is, but it's a waterscape. Here we have a very nice one, I think. This is a hospital, and this is I think in Vietnam. Is it in Vietnam? Well, that looks like it's Vietnam. Somebody Vietnamese here, can I can verify that's Vietnamese? Okay. Anyway, you know, so, but this is the inside outside. This is all part of the hospital, but look at it, you know. So why should you have to get from A to B? In fact, there was this interesting study not that long ago, which looked at old hospitals, looked at hospitals in the UK. And one of the famous hospitals just outside of London had the surgery where they performed obstetric surgery. So not obstetric, I mean orthopedic, where they did bone surgery outside. And to get to the surgery, you had to go, you have to wheel the person outside. Oh, it's weather. Stupid. Anyway, I presume they had some cover. And you take them out, and then when they're finished, freezing cold again, inside thing. And they did studies because later they blocked this whole thing out. Surgery now became part of the bigger hospital. People never went outside. And the number of deaths and side effects was great, much greater in the modern surgical world, where we're like insane about hygiene and everything like that, than in the old world. And this was part of the spirit of recent discovery that ventilation is better protector from COVID than a mask. So if you have good ventilation in the room, the ratio, the proportion of pathogens hitting you is going to be worse, and you're not catching it as much than even when you have a mask, because the air is static around you. So you're still coming out, still coming in. It's not only coming in through there. And so they found that, and then they said they kind of analyzed it in terms of the ventilatory properties of the external open the doors, close the doors, people are going out. We're not keeping the people trapped with the gas that was under their blankets and everything. And so we like the idea of going out. There are benefits to going out. Oh, okay. There are benefits to going out. We're just looking. Really? So I don't unambiguously genuflect to the presence of green. I think there's some really stupendously ugly presences of green and plants and stuff, and I think they can drive one nuts.
This building now looks very different. Looks like a one tree.
Does it? You got to, I would love to, yeah, let's put the picture up of that. Yeah, because that's what's gonna happen. Maybe it looks good now, I don't know.
Looks like amazing.
Good, in a positive way?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So maybe make a little investment of time. And we see this all over, and we probably think these are improvements. It's a nice, I mean, I think this is, how many like this space? How many don't like this space? Okay. We have reflective properties here. Was that now? Okay. Oh, you like this space too? Okay, fine. I'd be happy to see that. How many like this space? How many don't like this space? Oh, we have some biophilics. Did you vote twice? Okay.
The hospital that you thought was in Vietnam is in Singapore.
Singapore.
Yes.
Oh. You know, they have some great hospitals in Vietnam, though. What are they for? They've got some great ones for, I'll remember. Here's that famous one. That this was also in the time of Mies van der Rohe. And you can also see it's modernist with those big geometric forms. So in that sense, it's not particularly biophilic, but it's completely immersed and embedded in green with water under it. You could see the water. I mean, it's right. And here we have all sorts of hothouse type effects and a simple, lovely one. You may or may not like it. I mean, maybe you want to have boundaries. Okay, so I have a few questions about plants. First of all, how do you measure how much biophilic elements are there? Is it by the surface area of green? The percentage of somehow you do some measure of when I look from here, how much of my visual isovists are hitting onto green when I go there, so I can eventually take a mean measure, or I can modify that by talking about the frequency of locations people are in, and so I weight certain locations and I determine the sort of ratio of green to non-green. Is that how much biophilia is there? Should it be the volume? Like if I have a big tree, does that count as more than a hollow tree or just something else? What about color changes? Motion. Well, if you're studying and the stuff is going like this, is that a peaceful space? If you're studying and the wind comes up and the wind goes down, is that a peaceful space? Now, I say these because these are all natural things, right? But it turns out possibly that some components which are 100% natural are not facilitating restoration. Organic floors, wooden versus synthetic wood versus marble versus concrete. What's your take on concrete? It's made out of limestone as a sort of sticky stuff, and or gypsum, I don't remember which, and sand. Pretty natural, right? Tiles, baked. It's a ceramic. A tile is, baked. Like concrete is a ceramic too. So basically, what's our stand on ceramics? Odors, natural. Plenty of them you don't want. Colors, and so on. So how do you make decisions, these architectural decisions? It's a song people like to sing, but really they are being very architectural about how they are doing it. And then, are all plants equal? Right? So this is as organic as anything can be, right? And so it would be if there were insects all over it, and holes and all that stuff. So are we talking about like beautiful, good condition plants? Because that's hard to maintain. And what about all the plants? I mean, there's some really, I just stuck this in because a little, not my favorite, but I mean, I don't want it in my house, but other people might like it, right? Whom to say? So I don't know that there are studies that actually examine the particular types of vegetation or combinations, right? Does it matter which ones I put beside each other? Obviously, you get an interior designer that say, you should put these ones here and those ones over there. Well, is it then all about proportion? Because I could take a swatch of nature and it's got all sorts of things, fractal. Is that what we're trying to achieve in that? Anyway, so, you could just ask a question with respect to everything. What has the impact on well-being? It isn't necessarily a monotonic function, meaning every little more is always better, or less is worse. That's monotonic, always going in the same direction. Okay, here was the second one. That was all about the first principle of biophilic. The second one was indirect experience of nature. So now we're talking about not having direct contact with nature, not directly seeing it. I don't know if they consider indirect through a mirror, by the way. So now we're talking about materials, wood, stone, bamboo, natural materials, natural colors, earth tones, color of flora and fauna. Then we're going to simulate natural light and shadow. So if the artificial light is the right natural light or something, that's going to be in the direction of biophilic. And the shadows are sort of similar to those we find in nature. And then we can also have representations, artwork, photographs, and obviously all the digital monitors that can show you nature. So would it be as good if we had, like, what, in 10 years, presumably it will be cost effective to have this wall a solid, whatever the future thing will, whatever the future linoleum you just run along the edge that's a foldable monitor will be, and it will be cheap enough, I assure you, in 10 or 10 years. So that whole thing could be virtually anything, right? You could be looking out anywhere. And you make it high enough resolution, it's almost indistinguishable. So that good enough? Anyway, it's number 2. So here we have, we know where that came from. We know where that came from. We know what that comes from. That's pressed wood. That's lovely wood, that's metal, but I don't know, what's your take on metal? That's cloth, that's wood. This is a very biophilic natural place. Same with this, very natural place. Okay, so those are, you can even almost smell it, can't you? In some of those places, they would, yeah.
If in the future we have like the technology to maybe get like a foldable screen, what's to say we also don't have the technology to have like ubiquitous Apple Vision Pro?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we
it's
can
the same.
have whatever we want.
Well, okay, I mean, yes, there's a sort of a thin and a thick question there. There's a hard and simpler question. So superficially, the Apple Vision, we'll satisfy the condition of high level simulation of nature or biophilic elements. They didn't say, okay, here's the hard question. They didn't talk about the implications of how you get it. So as you know, people wearing right now Vision Pro, they can't wear it for, well, I just got one and I haven't been using it, but somebody did come over and they're using it, and he couldn't take it for more than 30 minutes, not because he got nauseated, as some people do. It's because it was too heavy on his head.
But is the question about wearables?
So, yeah,
Augmented reality or different?
yeah,
You could use projectors even today. You could put this quiet,
Yes.
powerful projectors
yeah.
tomorrow. Put them around the perimeter of the room and project tropical forest.
And I was doing it with a high resolution thing.
So is it good enough?
Okay, there is the question of at what point does the resolution good enough to be good enough? Or could we even do well just by having coarse resolution? But the one I was addressing was the consequences of the wearable, the nature of wearables, and what I mean, you feel that's if it's immersive, you don't feel it's mediating, but at some point the technology shows through. And I guess there is that question of when it shows through.
Is particle board like NdF also natural or?
I don't know. It's toxic to cut it. MDF is like, 80% glue or something. It's glue with powder, wood powder in it. Very strong, very flat. It keeps its flatness too. It doesn't warp. It can buckle, but bubble, but it doesn't warp. Yeah, any more? Okay, so we had,
But about nature, for the sake of the argument, shall we put the boundary somewhere?
well, I don't legislate. I think they're all inquiries myself. Oh, but wait, there is a question. So I stole this from some, kid thing, because I thought you would like it. But, me, I can't stand, no, it's lovely. It makes a change.
This is the plan, or is it?
I'm not saying anything. Now I'm saying something. So, okay, leather, natural material, right? We don't normally think of leather perhaps as, you see the furniture, but leather, dirt, right? Can't be more natural than that. Or does it have to be like healthy dirt, like humus, as opposed, not the one you eat, but humus that's made out of, plant yeah.
Aesthetically pleasing.
And it could be aesthetically pleasing. You cannot guarantee if it's filled with poop, it's not so aesthetically pleasing. But in many respects, here's a nice bit of polished steel. You count this material or not? What if it was, oh, tough guys. What if it was pig iron? Pig iron means it's quite, oh, no, come on. Pig iron rusts. It could almost be in nature, right? You get it out of the rock itself. It's a minimal, it's a process, of course, it's a process, but it's, whereas this steel is not meant to rust, it's not meant to do anything. But I'm not saying, we have some no's. This is I'll just call it rock or stone. There we have marble, there we have the thing. And you could call out a lot more. And we could try to enumerate them and decide whether they're in or out. And then we have what I suppose are man-made or human-made materials, synthetic materials. Well, they're ultimately obtained from natural materials, but that's a bit bizarre. It's a kid's answer, okay? But, and so here we have synthetic stone. Is that as good as the other stone? Can't tell the difference? Synthetic wood, can't tell the difference? The flooring that people have now, where you can drop water on it, doesn't ruin the wood. Synthetic leather, many people can't tell the difference. So it's, okay, and then you can ask a bunch of questions. Are the restorative benefits, such as they are, due to the properties, like thermal, sound, humidity, the properties that they have? Or is it due to them, the visual and the other things? And I don't want to go through it, but you can glance at it. Because I'm now taking far too much time, so I'm going to start speeding up. Then there's the question of synthetic colors. So if you were ever interested in carpets, one of the big deals is whether it was natural dyes or synthetic dyes. When they introduced synthetic dyes, it was a great collapse. It was a bad thing in the carpet market, in the, I'll call it for exotic reasons, the Orient. The colors do not have the kind of, they just don't have the kind of qualities that these colors have. And any person who knows anything about carpets, they can instantly tell you whether it's synthetic colors or natural colors. So if humans can tell, we could be sensitive to it.
Like if it's a machine making it for the person, does that make it any more natural?
No, it's, otherwise, if we had the hallmark of who makes it, we could have something arbitrarily man-made, human-made, but way down the chain, and it's not the outcome, it's the process. But you can raise the question about the role of process. Okay, then we have representations of nature. This is like nature right in the place, but we've already talked about digital screens or the screensavers or artwork. They also talk about pure artwork. And like we saw, and then recreations of natural scenes. So here's artwork. It's a Caravaggio. But it's got water, but if anybody, would you call this an urban landscape? Or would you call it a non-urban landscape? If you're in Venice, it's urban. And yet, it is outdoors. And it does have water, but the rest of the stuff isn't. Okay, then the third thing is space that evokes a sense of nature or is inspired by natural elements. And now they get really tie-dye-ish. And so there is a concept of prospect and refuge that comes from the study of animals in the wild and where you kind of run to. So if you're a mouse or a rat or a human or anything, there are places that are your refuge places, and you typically try not to spend too much time in the place where you think you have the greatest chance of being eaten, and you go to the refuge places. And also, there are some refuge places, like not in your burrow, that also provide you with prospect, so you can see out. Now, when you're in the place where you could be eaten, there's good prospect there. You can look around. So there's some kind of trade-off going on, right? If you're right in the middle of a giant plain, I mean, if there are 3 of you or 4 of you back to back, it's a pretty safe place to be, providing you're confident you can get from here to the refuge before they can get from there to you. But anyway, so where you can see and where you feel protected, those are the idea where you have both. So that's the idea that you like this sort of thing. Yeah.
Why is the wall slanted? Is it? to bounce
Just
off the wall?
architectural, right? Because I think it's giving you the idea you're looking down, but I just made that up right now. I don't know, they're architects. It's more interesting, don't you think, than yeah. And mystery and enticement. There's one where they encourage curiosity and exploration, and then risk and peril, where you have the thrill or perceived risk, like glass over the Grand Canyon. Or if you've you're the YouTube generation. If you've ever looked at the 10 most dangerous bridges in the world, or footbridges in the world, I wouldn't do it for anything. Cross those bridges. Okay, we'll come back a little bit, but that is a start on biophilia, right? We're going to give evidence in a minute. Not yet. We're still trying to get definitions. No, we're still trying to think about the problem. And as I said, I don't feel I've really begun to think about the problem in any level that I would consider to be deep. But these are the kind of initial reflections I always have. Okay, so biomorphic is imitation of natural forms or inspiration, taking structural inspiration from natural things. And they often have the property of having organic shapes, which means that you don't typically find in nature anything that is a perfect box. Rectilinear, you don't have the platonic solid, the geometric solids, your perfect polygons, your square, your cubes, well, or 2-dimensional versions of those. And so they tend to have soft edges. There's a lot of fluidity and movement in what we say is fluidity and movement in the shape. That's a static shape, but it's got fluid, it's a movement, and they're natural patterns, and they often are fractal. Now, this is what we mean by fractal sort of thing, and what the idea, so it's a great discovery or invention, depending upon your attitude to math. Of fractals. I don't know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, Mandelbrot, Harvard mathematician. It's not a complicated function that generates a line on a two-dimensional surface, or you could do it to n dimensions, but start with a two-dimensional surface. So line, angles, right? Could do that. But no matter what you do with this, the amount of ink on the page is not going to be three-dimensional. It's not going to be completely fill it up either. If it's a line, right? So a line is a one-dimensional entity. No matter how much line you put, you never get the full 2 dimensions. A fractal is a very curious thing. You start with a line and you go like this, but you don't continue like that. You then go a little smaller one, and then every turn there's a smaller one, and then every turn there's a smaller one, such that you end up, if you let this run for infinite time, you end up filling the entire 2D space with a 1D line, which makes no sense. You can't do that according to old-fashioned stuff. So it's got very interesting properties, this fractal. And the reason they think this is natural is because if you look at, for instance, the end of you're in space and you're looking at a shoreline, you're looking at the edge of the United States, right? And you got this level of magnification, and it's got, it's a sort of thing like that. And then you zoom in over here, and it's got, the same sort, not exactly, but the same sort of stuff. Then you zoom in, same sort of stuff, zoom in, same sort of stuff. Now you're down at the level of sand, same sort of stuff. Then you go into a sand, well, it's crystalline there, but if it weren't crystalline, same sort of thing, same sort of thing, same sort of thing. I mean, eventually you end up with empty space until you get to the subatomic particles, but because there's great spaces between in nature. But in fractals, there is no necessarily great space between things. So it's a very, very bizarre thing, but they argue that. So this distribution, so look, we have these big things, and then we have these other veins, and then we have smaller veins, and then we have smaller veins in there, and this, so it seems that it's filling up. Okay, so that's fractal. And is that what we want? I don't know. So now these are not fractal. These are what? These are organic, curvilinear, irregular, fluid in movement with soft edges. Okay, not my cup of tea. On the other hand, and not something Zaha Hadid would do, the architectural company I have a relationship with, but the guy in charge of Zaha, Patrick Schumacher, is famous for having said, my architects would rather cut off their hand than draw a straight line. So there are plenty of architects out there who have discovered that you can use curves in architecture. Sorry. Then we have these famous Sagrada Familia from Gaudi, late 19th, early 20th. This wonderful TWA Flight Center, John Kennedy by Saarinen, and I think it's been completely redone. It's not even, is it a hotel now or something? It's been changed. I didn't take the name of this, nor that. Here we have the Milwaukee Art Museum, where we have, this is from the outside, right? And then inside, more of the same. So these are all, are we on biomorphic? We're on biomorphic, because these are biomorphic. In fact, these are imitating biological forms. Bubbles and, bubbles, yeah, well, natural things and, okay, now soft edges. Whoa. Okay, so then I say, well, can we define biomorphism? After all, it should be, we can define a fractal. So maybe we can find biomorphic. So I started to naturally ask my second best friend, Chat, what she thinks. And I asked her if, what, can we understand biomorphism as a deformation on a polyhedron? Right, because the polyhedron, right, they got those, the ones that his people would have to cut their hand off if they made. So those are a lot of straight edges. But maybe deformations will do it. And she was very accommodating, and she says, yes, you could see it that way, if you so wish. She didn't say that, but because she knows how to talk to me. And she will know better and better, because now they are allowing more history. Up until now, not much, but now more history. So you should, by all means, personalize Chat. She's not to talk to me without giving me APA formatted references for things she says.
Are you using GPT-4?
4 yeah. With the plugins, with the academic plugins. But still not there yet for us. For instance, I can't get her to help me get the actual quantitative information out of the articles. What's the matter with that? But words,
The RAG, RAG.
I know. But
The chatbots can do it.
okay, well, I'm looking forward to it. Usually there's a complaint saying I'm not allowed to read that PDF. That's my typical problem right now. So biomorphic forms are typically smooth, organic, irregular, contrasting with flat faces, sharp edges, and vertices of polyhedra, which is just what we were talking about. Plus, we didn't say anything about here about fractals. So there are a variety of things you can do to polyhedra that would make them into this sort of thing. And one is, even though tessellation and subdivision will still be preserving corners, why does she say that? I guess if you go smaller and smaller, you can approximate a curved surface. So that's the idea. You can approximate a curve even from a polyhedron if you make tiny little straight lines, tiny straight lines. Smooth deformations, morphing techniques, topological dynamics. So, if you had a mind to do this sort of thing, you would then say, well, can I define it mathematically? And this is the first step I would go if I were trying to define it mathematically. Okay, I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I'm just going to show you some things now. So this is obviously the stuff we're talking about. Irregular and curvilinear. Here's natural and curvilinear and stuff. This is from the interior looking up of that same Sagrada Familia. This is it doesn't seem to be casting light in the way nature does. So I think this is not an example. This is maybe a non-example. Here we have all the curvy stuff, beautiful. That's also, so that's one. Oh, no, it isn't, but okay. If you are familiar with Gaudi's work, he has some interiors.
Belgian architect.
But he has some interiors that are very much like this, and maybe a little more extreme than that. You know that guy? Okay, and here we have more Gaudi. This is Zaha. That's Gary, and who's this guy down here is Senosian. Okay. Boo, bionic, that's bionic. I did not define bionic, which is another thing, but I'm going to say that we have done what is biophilia and what is biomorphism now. So a lot of this has to do with measuring stress and saying that it's good with respect to stress. So now we get quantitative. Stress is a natural part of life. I have to give a talk. If I don't have the stress of having to give a talk, I don't run as hard. I run hard. I feel good about myself. There are times when the stress is negative, when it gets either too much or there's other reasons why it's stressful. And then bad things happen to me. My blood pressure can go up. Certainly my heart rate will go up. I don't mind if my heart rate goes up, if I'm like, if I take my heart rate right now, even though I feel perfectly comfortable in front of you, I'm sure it'll be 10% higher, 15% higher than it would normally be. But that's okay, because stress is a natural thing. You know, you're running hard. You're putting stress on your body. They tell you got to put stress on your body if you want to be healthy. You should be doing a HIIT, right? High intensity intervals. Well, you like hugely stress out all the parts of your body, because it's the body's response to that stress builds it up, right? Same as weightlifting, stress. Okay, so it's all good. So we have either an external event seen as a threat by an individual, or it doesn't even have to be seen as a threat. It could just be an external event that is going to be extremely demanding. And it puts a stress on the body. We have some kind of response. In this case, the flight response to the gun where we have to run fast, or our own concept of having to do it as hard as we can. Same sort of thing. We get that, then we have some natural stuff that you've all learned about, sympathetic stuff, and adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, which is a stress dampener. And then we have these effects on the body, and then you act to reduce the stress. Ideally, the threat is removed, and then the body returns to normal. And this is happening all the time. And a healthy body does this because it's what our life is about. We're constantly under varying degrees of stress, and this is the body's way of adapting. This is a natural process. It does not harm you to do this. Otherwise, the HIIT thing would be worse than it is good. But the consequence of stress, not consequence, but the idea of stress, it's very multidimensional. So there is a physiological, we're saying, alarm system. That's the one you got to do the running now. And there's a neurophysiological adaptive process to that. Okay, the neuro stuff, the neurotransmitters. And then there's a psychological appraisal process. In the case of running, go faster, but it's okay, go faster. This is complex, going across many levels, but that's what stress is. So it's kind of natural. Now, if you look at each one of them, we have the physiological perspective. It's part of this homeostatic system of, pushing us outside of our norms and then making a response physiologically so that the body can deal with and push us back. So it's a homeostatic process, pushed out but bringing us back. And it's due to a discrepancy. The homeostatic model always says there's these boundaries in which you're trying to keep it, whatever they're defined as, some function of where you should be. And when it sees that we're moving out, it's a dynamical system. So a control system, so it responds. Okay. And that's life. Psych says that broadly speaking, there's a threat-related meaning or a demand. I'm not meeting a demand. And that's how, if you have a lot of that, that's how you have too much psychological stress. That's how you end up with links to physical health and also psychological issues. And curiously, each stressor has a distinct neurochemical signature. And so there are a variety of different kinds of circuits that deal with different kinds of stress, and neural circuits and biochemical circuits. Now, that's the background for stress. And now allostatic load, a nice concept. And the guy who was an exponent, I don't know if he first introduced it, but he's a well-known guy for developing it, says it's the price people pay for constantly adapting to stress. Well, for adapting to stress. And you could see if they're in a life where they have to address constantly adapt to stress, then they're going to have a high allostatic load. Even if they're happy people and they like stress, they're probably going to have a higher allostatic load unless their body somehow can habituate to that higher stress load and it doesn't regard those phenomena to be as stressful any longer. I guarantee the first time you have to give a talk in front of 1,000 people, it's stressful. But if you give 10 or 20 talks in front of 1,000 people, it becomes like giving a talk in front of 100 people. And, so you can recategorize things and that would change. Fine. All right. So allostatic overload as opposed to load is this constant stress and wear and tear on the body. The chronic overactivity, or really the key thing is dysregulation, where the stress was just a little too much. I brought myself back, or maybe I never quite got myself back, and I was like anxious. Ever since that time in front of 1,000 people, I'm terrified of speaking in front of 1,000 people again. That kind of thing would be an allostatic overload from that one event, right? And okay, and you get it at different rates at different times over your life, and depending upon your exposure frequency, and so suppose you're going to have to face the 1,000 people every week for 6 months. Bad allostatic overload. You're going to find that person now. Here was their blood pressure. Now this is their blood pressure. This was their heart rate. Now this is their mean heart rate. This is their heart rate variability. Now this is their heart rate variability. And there are going to be several other measures. So I don't know about galvanic skin response, but okay. So it's going to have all sorts of things, effects. They don't sleep as well. All sorts of effects. So here's the idea again of allostatic overload. Stress is normal. We have a homeostatic process for dealing with it. And that is a normal kind of thing. As the stress increases, we get allostatic load piling up because the adaptation hasn't been perfect. We didn't bring it back to zero again. And as we accumulate that dysregulation, we get overload. Now, they're going to try to show that people in different types of built environment have higher allostatic overload, right? We're going to try to say that this environment is not high allostatic overload, low or not at all. This environment is allostatic overload. I guarantee if you have to spend a night in the middle of a jungle, you're going to have one hell of a allostatic overload. And you are in as natural an environment as you could possibly be. So, grain of salt, yeah? But nonetheless. So here is a long term, here's a nice graphic. It wouldn't be one that I would make, but it does have everything you want. So I circled the environmental stressors. Your home situation, economic situation, isolation, work. These are things they're putting emphasis on. Physiological stressors, bad diet, right? Divorce, trauma, major life events. Anyway, all of that leads to some kind of perceived stress or even not even perceived stress. And that leads you to all of this fight, freeze. Oh, okay. Anyway, behavioral responses, which are either adaptive or maladaptive, which is a physiological response. People are different is how they do that sort of thing. Then we have the physiological response coming out. We have the behavioral response, which leads to a physiological response. This stuff does. And now we have allostatic load. And it's either an adaptation where you change to optimize, or and the allostasis is how you're making those adjustments. And now if it gets to the allostatic overload, you can measure along these different areas. Okay. So one of our colleagues in Cambridge, UK, She's going to do really good work on this and is starting to do really good work. Her name is Cleo Valentine. And like any person who has an eye on the prize, no prize, I mean, but just, eye on the work. When you want to do something, say in this area, you say, can I find a term that's rigorously defined? Can I find something that's genuinely like well understood or documented, scientific? So she goes after allostatic load. In fact, she had a personal reason for doing that because she was told she was going to die. They didn't know how to fix it and everything. And really it was from allostatic overload from an infection that they couldn't find. So the body was being hugely stressed and she was just in terrible decline. And this was a woman who was like a massive competitor in originally one sport, then got all broken up and damaged. And then she went into a second sport when she recovered, and then she got all broken up and damaged. And then she was like lying around waiting to die. And she did all these studies herself. And finally, she pleaded with the doctors to try a procedure. And they did something that they thought wouldn't work. And indeed, she was right, and it saved her life. And it was all from allostatic overload. So guess who got super interested in allostatic overload, does an architecture degree, and says, now how can I do a PhD on the topic that is going to be rigorous? Well, allostatic overload, there's neuroscience involved, there's tight measurements involved. So that's what you do. You choose something that is well-defined, highly meaningful, everybody understands it, and it's damn bad for you. And now you make some hypothesis.
You don't have the slide, it's the wave. But you know that it's a very useful concept.
Oh, please show us. I should have it then.
So if this is your normal regime, homeostatic balance, right? And you have a stressor, this is amount of stressor, some stress marker, amount of norepinephrine in your blood.
Yeah.
And you're stressed, you go back, right? You're stressed, you go back. And then your body is trying to regulate, you go up, and you fluctuate at some wrong level. And allostatic load is sometimes described as this
Moving
disparity between the new state of your body, up and down, and the optimal one. So this is the allostatic load here, this gap.
Yeah, and in fact, the load should, the line, this line, should really be, I see, so here's the stressor, brings it to zero.
That's normal situation. Yeah, you
Brings
recover
it to zero,
to normal.
full recover, so you never get to zero.
Yeah, and if you give a lecture in front of 1,000 people every day, you never get arrested.
Yeah, but this would suggest that you're always in some kind of load. I would think that is.
If you average, exactly, yeah. So
The low, anyway, yeah, great, it's a great diagram. Okay, does anybody have a question now? I'm gonna try to, I don't know how fast I'm gonna go, but I hope I'll be done in 15 minutes. Does somebody have a question right now? You interrupt me if you do. Okay, so here's the biophilic hypothesis. Compared to people living in non-biophilic environments, if we could define these things precisely, the people in biophilic environments have less stress, they have less attention capacity diminishment in a way that we're going to define shortly, they have greater well-being, they have greater happiness, they have faster recovery time from illness or convalescence, and they even have better learning, memory, cognitive performance. It's getting better and better and better and better. It's just like constrained bliss. So yeah, I sure wish we didn't have buildings. Just think how happy we could be if we lived in the wild without why bother with clothing? Anyway, okay. So the argument, the logic of the argument is that other architectural factors cannot explain this as well as the biophilic argument. So the benefits that we get from patent and obvious and measurable benefits we get from doing an experiment, doing observations, and we see that people benefit from being in these biophilic environments, we can only claim that it's the biophilic elements in it if we, that there are no confounds, there are no other reasons that could explain it that happen to be constant conjunctions with those. Whenever there's this, there's this. Whenever there's this, there's this. So if it turns out that there's always a, could be this, then we can't definitively say it's the biophilic stuff. So that there could be these non-bio causes like better air. Oh, that better air means it's biophilic. Well, that's a question begging. Better soundscape. Oh, well, that's biophilic because it's a, no, maybe it isn't. Maybe, and so on. Brighter lights, better colors, more beautiful design, greater symmetry, easier wayfinding. So many reasons. And we have to rule these out. So, so the way we do it is to try to show is first we have both experiments and observational studies, and we have to show that they're well controlled, that they didn't have confounds that could invalidate it, that they say it's biophilic, but it could be biophilic or this, or this, or this, and those are confounds. Ideally, the function of a control is to say, look, we are controlling for this, we are controlling for that. So we're doing this and not these things. And then, so there are no other equally plausible explanations. So yeah, biophilic elements are the cause. Okay, so here's where it all began. This is the 1984 paper by Ulrich, and it was called Views Through a Window May Influence Recovery from Surgery. So he had in the hospital floors 2 and floors 3, they were shaped like this. And this is floor 2. And in the patient's rooms over along here, you can see these trees. And patient rooms over here, you can't see these trees unless you come to the window. And although they didn't say that the people didn't get up out of bed, if they were in bed, they would never see anything but what they could see out the window, straight line. Okay. And there's going to be the course of a whole day here. And what they did was they looked over 6 years of results from patients who had, I think, a gallbladder operation. It's on the next slide. They had a gallbladder operation, and they matched them as well as they could. And they had where's N? Okay, next page. Anyway, what they found was that if they had the view from the trees, they were in the hospital about 8 days, 7.96 days before discharge. And if they had a view of the brick wall, they were in 3/4 of a day longer. Well, that's a surprise. Nobody expected it to matter whether you were on the same corridor, the same floor, same nurses, the same treatment, convalescent. That's a surprise. And they also took notes because they do, the nurses, they weren't told to. This is like retrospective, right? And the number of negative notes, such as they were upset and crying, was 1.13 versus almost 4. Yeah.
In the study, was there any information about visitors coming to see them, like family and friends?
I don't personally know, but it was a good study. So I think maybe I did see that something, but they tried to measure all of that stuff. So if it was recordable, and visiting would have been recordable, they would have had that down and they would have tried to control for that. Or they're not controlling, they would try to state it. And then when they do the data analysis, they would have to see if that could be a possible explanation, a factor, a meaningful statistical factor. Of course, they could pool, many factors would become statistically significant so I don't know how well.
Maybe the case if you have a nicer room, will come often to visit you in the hospital.
Maybe so, or maybe they had flowers in the room. They didn't say whether they got flowers in the room. I'll bet you that, because that's going to ruin your biophilic hypothesis, right? Anyway, yeah. Then they had some. Then they looked at how much painkiller they were taking, and on days 1, the wall group versus the tree group So the tree group had a little bit less strong painkiller. And they had more moderate, quite a bit more moderate, but less strong. And they had more weak, but and they're not giving significance here, but somewhere there must be significance. Okay, that's on day, that's like right out of the op. Right after the gallbladder's taken out. Then days 2 to 5, whoa, that's significant. And look at, whoa. And they're mostly getting weak stuff. Right? So they're, see, I mean, you'd have to weight what you think the consequences of this are, but it's clear that they seem to be in less pain. I think we would all agree this means they're in less pain. And now day 6 to 7, the wall group is already doing much better by now, but they're still taking twice as much there, just a little more there. And the tree group is still taking a bit more. They're indulgent now, right? They're just taking it just because it's nice. And okay, so it was everybody had a gallbladder operation. They were matched for sex, age, smoker, obesity, year of surgery, and the floor level. And they had 23 pairs for the two, because there were, all the rooms were occupied there. Okay, so hey, wait a sec. This is meaningful, right? This is super meaningful. Let's try this again. This is more than super meaningful. People pay thousands of dollars for a drug that has a very small effect because of the distorted way that the pharmaceutical system works. But all we have to do is put them in a better room. And what makes the room better? Maybe even if you put more plants in the room. But they didn't test that. They tested whether you'd think that by now they would be doing tons of, let's put a big plant in here and a big thing, and then we'll make the colors right and do all that. You'd think they would do that, wouldn't you? Anyway, it took years. This was 1984. The hospitals weren't yet being designed with all the views. It took them years before they started to redesign hospitals with the idea that you should see green. So now, Ulrich now, 10 years later, or some number of years later, just seven years later, increases the study to stress recovery. So now he's saying that hey, it had something to do with like stress, right? Body after an operation, body's in big stress conditions. So he says, okay, let's induce, this is going to be now experimental. The other was observational. Now we're going to do experiment. That means we've got to control it. So they're going to induce the stress, and they give people a stressful movie. And then they show them 6 videos, and some are of urban environments, and some of them are of natural environments, after they have induced the stress by watching this gory movie that, I'll tell you about it in a second. It's not terrible, I don't want to watch it. And then they had self-rating of stress and physiological indicators. The physiological ones were things like how fast the heartbeat is. I don't know at those times that they were talking about, they weren't measuring heart rate variability, but that would come out in this, but they would have to. Then muscle tension, skin conductance, pulse transit time, I think is really hard. Systolic blood pressure. So they're measuring their blood pressure. And the findings was that were that individuals with natural versus built settings after they were already stressed experienced more rapid and complete recovery, and that the recovery in the natural view happened really fast, like in about 4 minutes. Now the data, here's the stressor movie. I gave you these just so you had an idea. It was a carpentry situation. And black and white about prevention of work, about accidents that were preventable. That means you see the accident. And they had some serious injuries with simulated blood and mutilation. Let's not have the full, it's full, right? Not just the suggested. I expect the hand is over there and the body's over here. And then these were employees in a woodworking shop, and they were careless. They deserved it. Yeah, right. Okay, so these are avoidable accidents. And then we're going to show them 6 different post-stress videos. One was of natural vegetation, the sounds and trees and vegetation and occasional light breeze, no people or animals. Another one was dominated with trees, but there's a fast-moving stream, and we hear quite loud stream, in fact. And then we have these other ones, heavy urban traffic. Then we have light traffic, then urban with many pedestrians, and then urban with few pedestrians in a shopping area. Okay, let's see the results. Okay, so this is a galvanic skin response, or, you know, they often call it electrodermal now. And here we have, whoa, got the stressor. Whoa. Now okay. That's it, no more stress. And now we're going to show you the other stuff. The traffic, it took you down a bit. Pedestrian mall took you down. Oh my, look at what nature did. And not only that, look at how fast it was at the 4-minute mark. Everything seemed that well, traffic didn't, but even the pedestrian mall seemed to have its effect at 4 minutes, but then it didn't go down nearly as much as nature too. Okay, so that's skin conductance. Okay? Okay. Blood pressure. Same thing, 4-minute mark. Muscle tension, clenching, right? Again, look at that. And not much between the pedestrian mall and traffic. In fact, pedestrian mall was slightly worse than traffic here. Pedestrian mall here was slightly worse than traffic. Changed, wasn't it? The other way around in the other two? Traffic was worse there. Traffic is slightly better here. In all cases, however, nature is having a 4-minute effect. So, wow, this is pretty serious. Maybe we should introduce a new notion called restorative. So that's what they start to do. People start to now think about nature as having a restorative effect. We'll talk about that more now. So, and they weren't just these physiological recuperations, there were more psychological recuperation too. So they measured on the basis of having people score them verbally and through also physiological measures, but these are measures of emotion. So it's not just physiological, they're what people are saying. And we see that there was a reduction of the nature and fear, statistically significant, strong reduction in anger and aggression, even got worse than the pedestrian mall. And there was a traffic reduced it. That's also significant. Positive affects, that's sort of like happy feelings about something. Traffic didn't give us any, but the pedestrians did. Sadness, still sad. Oh, a reduction. Oh, these are reductions. And then attentiveness or interest. And that gave us more attentiveness or interest reduction than
Something to look at.
yeah, people. Yeah, so none of these are statistically significant. Okay. So this is interesting, right? This looks real. It certainly had a big effect on the design of hospitals and the design of other things. So now people start getting into really the restorative nature. Now they start to study this restorative stuff. So now we're going to see studies that measure the sense of respite or recovery associated with time spent in and around urban green. That's one kind. These are mostly, more observational studies. And then we're going to have urban environments with more than that. Again, these could be observational studies, but now, and these are more observational studies. But we have some where we induce stress and we test it again. So the more The more an individual was stressed prior to a green space visit, the greater degree of stress recovery. So, this is some kind of survey. Here is pre-visit. So they're going to come into the green world. They're in the non-green world. So if they were in the non-green world and they come into the green world, we get a reduction. And so this, if they had a high stress level, there was a nice big delta. If they had, with respect to headache, there was a reduction. And if they were, their feeling of happiness or well-being or well-balanced goes up. So here we have data. Oh, what's going on here? Okay. And just being in a green space decreased stress levels. So here they're not in stress in green spaces, and they are. These are, we're defining them as other activities. And here they're doing sports. And so before the body is more stressed, and then it's the time of the survey. So again, here doing sports reduces stress more than pursuing less strenuous other activities. So if you're doing sports in say, I guess, a basketball stadium versus playing soccer outside in the green, I guess that would qualify. That would be having, so I guess you should be do your sports outside. And then other activities on the positive side. Still, we can ask are there other causes that might be at play here? We know these things these are stressful environments, crowding and density, noise levels, inadequate lighting, too dim, too harsh, ventilation and air, poor ventilation and air quality. So all those things would have to be controlled for too. It might not be that being outside is better for you because you're outside. It could be that it's because it's less dense, it's less noisy, and better light. I mean, think how noisy it is inside a basketball stadium, right? With the squeaking of the sounds and the banging of the ball and everything, versus outside, there's the crowd, but if there's no crowd, okay. So again, and there's more. Layout, navigation, color schemes, ergonomics, privacy. Okay. %. Well, okay, fine. So here, now we're going to test this hypothesis of attention restoration. And what they're really looking at here is they say, look, when you I don't know if it applies purely to allostatic load, but when you're stressed, so stress is short, allostatic is long. When you're stressed, we can show that certain sort of stress and so on. I love stress. I perform better in stress. I'm one of those horrible people who loves exams, but not many people are like that. But so I do well in stress until there's going to be some point in which I begin to crack, right? And everybody's going to have some place in which they're starting to crack. And when they start to crack, their concentration goes down. They're so nervous, they can't concentrate right. It's a very few basketball players who truly are like Michael Jackson, where I got the right name wrong? Oh my God. Oh my God. And I watched so much of him. I continue to watch so much. It's age. I need water. Like Michael Jordan or Steph Curry. They get it under the clutch, right? Not everybody can you pass it to them in the last 2 seconds, and they get it with a high percentage of the time. But Michael Jackson too. All right. Yeah, my daughter would hear me. She would just never be more pleased than that. Okay. So the intuitive argument is we have some steady state of attentional capacity. right? Some people really can concentrate almost all the time, and other people can not concentrate to that level. There's some steady state. And this is somewhat a partial function of the activities and what's going on in the environment you're in too. So it's like screaming loud, not going to be as good as when it's not screaming loud, typically. And we're able to do more or less, people have this thing, I like working in loud cafes, doesn't bother me at all. But other people are not like that. So everybody's different, but we all have the same kind of curves eventually. You just have to figure out what. So we're going to give them tasks and figure out where they are on this sort of concentration thing. And then we're going to change the environment and see what the difference is. And if there is a difference, we're going to attribute it to the changed environment. Then we have to recognize it matters on the activities that they were doing in each one. Okay, so the problem with these experiments is if we're going to look at things like long-term, can we adequately control people do over long periods of time, like natural experiments or real-life settings? A lot of reasons why things are like that, like people are moving to the setting that they like, and maybe that's it. Even if it's allowed, I go to the loud cafes, and maybe, you take me in a loud cafe and you say, oh, loud cafe performance. So you really have to individualize this, and typically in experiments or observations, you're not taking all those factors to say, we're bunching the people into the people who like loud cafes and the people who, we don't do it like that. And then the idea though is if you have enough people, all those individual differences and confounds that could be there, like suppose loud cafes are also places with a lot of light, that all that stuff's gonna wash out with enough population. And I'm not convinced, but there is evidence building up. So let's look at that. So we've got 3 quasi-experimental methods. So either subjects are operating in a natural or a non-natural environment for a given duration. And if it was a controlled condition, then it's less than an hour that they're operating in one or the other. And that looks like an experiment. If it's one of these real life setting things, we get people who are camping or doing something out there for days or weeks. And then we're going to measure them. And so we won't have induced stress. We're going to just measure them, see what they look like versus the other people who weren't there. And then we're going to take people who have chosen to live in places for a long time, like the biophilic places, and we're going to compare this whole population who live in these kind of conditions. Let's see what they look like compared to this whole population who live in these conditions. But of course, there could be a lot of, I like to live in these conditions, so we don't know what the confound, right? People are finding what they want, and it's not because it's like in health tests. Sometimes we think that we're finding that, oh, you eat a lot of oranges, that's good for you for antioxidants, blah, blah. And it turns out that the people who are eating the most oranges are also the people who are running more. Because they always have an orange before they go running or something, whatever. But that's the kind of danger. Okay, and then we're going to do, okay, so this is the general structure of these things. So here's the controlled experiment. We like controlled experiments. Not that the others aren't important, but these are the better ones. So we're going to give them a mental loading task prior to the environmental exposure. And then we're going to expose them to a biophilic environment versus a non-biophilic environment. And we're going to see if the biophilic environment has a restorative effect in a way that, like we did before, when we gave them the terrible stress thing, seeing that workplace accident, and then we showed them, and those are in videos. But now we're going to do more better than that. So, and we're going to test them on one or more attention measuring tasks. So I spent a lot of time actually trying to look at what those attention measuring tasks are so that you know what that sort of test is. So here is what we mean by natural versus non-natural. Sometimes they would go for the big things, they would take them backpacking or something, or the non-natural would be a non-wilderness vacation or no vacation or an urban walk. or passive relaxation. Those are the kind of and we could compare these now. This is not the specific experimental, this is the observation ones typically. The environments are quite diverse, though we have some that are active engagements in nature, the natural ones, where they're really doing something out there, or they're just hanging around looking at stuff, or it's a virtual exposure to the nature, where they're watching video or viewing images. So all of those could be nature, but they're not quite the same, right? So we want to do all of that. And then the non-natural is we have an equivalent exposure, but it's urban or indoor. And I didn't see that they define passive or active actually on those ones. And then we have placebo where have no restriction on where they do their youthful activities or spend relaxation time. Those are just people, right? Just people. We'll see what happens with just people. So here are the measures. So remember, the idea is that in certain environments, you can fatigue and have reduced concentration. They call it reduced attention, and they talk about it as an intentional measure that you reduce. So one of the tests is the digit span. And in order to see how much concentration or attention capacity you have, you show them a sequence and they have to repeat it. And when they fail twice, that's where you say their thing is. Okay, so that's how much attention, that's how we measure how much attention capacity they have. That's one method. So this is digit span, the maximum length before failing twice. And there are two forms of this. There's the digit span forward, where the digits are recalled in the order presented. And there's the digit span backward, where you have to say it in the reverse order. You might expect you're worse in one than the other, but I didn't look to see. It's possible you're not. There's one called a trail making test. And when kids are really little and you give them a computer and you want them to learn the numbers, or you want them to, you can put these things and I guess you could get them to learn the numbers by lighting up the next one, and then they begin to recognize a symbol. Or you could have things where they have to learn ascending, they learn and they have to join the numbers in order. So they just have to connect them, right? And you can see how fast they can do it, because of course it's branching out and there's larger numbers and it gets more things to, more serial search. So this is all, attention is always usually, or it's either about memory or it's about serial search. So finding Waldo is a serial search. You've got to look everywhere. But if Waldo was a brilliant orange and there was no other orange on the picture, Waldo would jump out, because the visual system can do parallel processing on color like that. But not Waldo, who has different parts of color and different things, and there's all sorts of confounds around. You have to check. So that's serial search. And here they have to connect the randomly positioned things and do it in the order, but they're supposed to do 1, then A, 2, then B, 3, then C, okay? So it's not just 1, 2, 3, it's 1A, 2B, C, 3C. And that's a trail making test, and we see how long they take and what error rate they have. And then there's a proofreading task where they have to identify misspellings, typographic and grammatical errors in a 5-page text within 10 minutes. That one sounds like work, doesn't it? Okay, and the score depends on detected errors and detected errors, I guess, and yeah, detected errors versus like false mistaken error. Well, it wasn't an error, and it's over the 10 minutes, so it's not speed accuracy, but you could, yeah, I guess you could do speed accuracy. Okay. and you have to ignore distractors. Then this is an interesting one. There's the Necker cube pattern control. Do you know all these?
Not this one.
No, they're not this one. Okay, so the pattern one. Okay, so you look at a Necker cube, and if it's the very first time you're seeing it, it takes anywhere from like 30 seconds to 5 minutes before it suddenly toggles. People are super different. Right, but after that one time, you can always see the two. Boom. Now, how fast does it toggle? Half you've already seen. That's a rate, right? It's a rate. It depends, and I mean, largely it's because you start following a line and then suddenly, whoa, it goes the other way because the lines aren't, okay, fine. So we get the baseline, how many flips you see, they were report flips, so, and we determine a baseline over a certain number of times. And then we also have another condition where we ask them to hold it. And now we see how many they get before it flips. Because even if you try to hold it, right? Okay, so
It follows gamma distribution. If you measure time of flip and
Yeah.
plot it as a histogram, it gives you statistical distribution called gamma distribution.
all right, well, you should show us that on the board
It's like a
instead.
long tail.
A long tail, yeah.
Normal.
Okay, so we want to know the percentage reduction of flips between the controlled case and the baseline case. In other words, if you're trying, how successful are you when you're concentrating? And that's going to be a measure of concentration. Okay, that one's a cool one. And then there's a search and memory task. And here you have to memorize target letters. And then you have to find them in the sequence. Now, I'm not gonna go over it, but yeah,
So like this one, the one where you said it's like serialized search, aren't you like sort of assuming that they take like an approach where they sort of like slowly go through it, like piece by piece and like remember the previous? Because couldn't they just like if you're looking for Waller, couldn't they just like if it's a child, maybe they just look at it completely randomly and like just guess?
but they're not kids, it's us.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, look, people could have different strategies.
Seems like it doesn't test attention if you approach it like sort of just random. Like I don't know.
Well, okay,
Well, it's a well-studied question. If you have a large number of potential locations, and you do it randomly, especially if there are several things to find, you always spend particular time to find it. And you could measure how, if you use eye tracker, for example, you can measure how long people dwell in one location and how long it takes for them to move across the screen. It's all readily measurable.
well, okay, so I guess, but that doesn't address the question of whether different strategies are more or less efficient. And if someone has a crappy strategy, well, what about that? And I expect that if they have a crappy strategy, as long as we are,
If it's random, no strategy will help, especially if you want to find more than one item, right? So you could accidentally start from the right place, but then you'll have to find the other one. And the chances are very low that you will accidentally hit the second one, right? After the first one. Look for 3 items, it's less likely, etc. So you do probability multiplication.
yeah, but I could imagine okay. You're right, we could think more about this. Definitely. But it seems to be that search and memory are some measure of concentration. And we want something in this space. And a lot of them have to do with memory because nothing gets into memory except as it first passes through attention. So if I have a big thing over here and I show you all sorts of stuff, it doesn't actually get encoded unless there was some amount of attention that saw it. And so the encoding process is thought to be fundamentally post-attentive, even though some very early work on what the nature of attention was and what gets into a visual buffer, still it was that visual buffer, even if that stuff all got in there like that, then it's gone. It goes away into the ether unless you got some attention and put it into a quick working memory location. So that's the assumption that that memory is relevant in attention. And now, so now we show them a bunch of random numbers like this, and I have to space bar when it's not the target. It's irritating, right? Yeah, so I made all of these stuff. I had to make a GIF that would do this for you so that you could understand quickly what these tests are. Otherwise, you'd read it and you'd spend time like me trying to figure out what they are.
2 times, 3 times, 5 times.
On this one. Oh, even worse, right? Terrible. Okay, that's it for there. And then there's a symbol digit modalities task where the participants match symbols to digits using a key of 9 pairs. So here's the key. And now you have to put the number with respect to that. And so you're going to be looking up, or you're memorizing it. Right. And I think I got tired by now. There were more, but they're like, okay. Now, what were the findings? So, there's a big meta-analysis of all of these. And it distinguished the natural experiments, comparing natural and non-natural ones. Those are the ones that are not these experiment ones. And then the randomized investigations, which we're doing, and before and after. And okay, anyway, they took 31 studies in the meta-analysis. So 31 studies that people reported on in the literature, 31 articles. And they found some support for significant positive effects of exposure to natural environments with respect to the digit span forward and the digit span backward and the trail making. Remember the trail making 1A, 2B? But the rest of them did not show marked beneficial effects. So we have to say the jury's still out, right? I mean, you have to explain why this is the case. This is a real finding, but then maybe it has more to do with an artifact of the test than it does with something else. Maybe the test is testing something more specific than you realize. And but you understand what the tension is. So now we're looking back. And how would we understand what's going on? Well, we better define all the key measures. And I haven't defined well-being or happiness. We do understand what recovery is. We haven't defined learning or memory or cognitive performance, but we do have measures for those things. So you got to define all of that. Then you have to define your biophilic components. We talked about problems with that and constant conjunction. And then we have various methods. And then ultimately, we would like a deep underlying cause, a theoretical one, which tells us what's going on at a more neural level, or at least a mechanism in psychology that is computational. And I think I'm not going to go any further than that. And you'd say, oh, thank you. Okay. I might have, I mean, I've got another 100 slides, but I don't think I organized them yet. So that's all I wanted to do, to introduce you to the topic of biophilic and biomorphic design, because the longer Sergey and I, certainly my attitude, stay in this game of sort of cognitive neuroscience for architecture, the more I think what the architects really want. They want specifics, like, where should I put such and such if I want to optimize the probability that people will actually find it when they need it, like the staircase or something, or an exit, or how to get to A to B. There's that stuff. But a lot of it has to do with emotion and well-being. And they want to know, how do I design better environments for well-being? And now they can go into typologies. Typologies are things like, prisons. If we're designing a prison, surely an enlightened society would like to enhance the well-being of the prisoners and get them on the right track. Are we supposed to just punish them day in and day out and put them in a miserable environment which just breaks them forever? So how do you do it with the constraints of a prison? So we need some study of what well-being means. But if we're talking about well-being, maybe we should be culturally sensitive. Maybe well-being is not so reductionist. Maybe there's a lot of other stuff that goes into well-being and it's culturally different. And so on and so forth. So that, like, hospitals about well-being and health, educational environments. Is this a good room? Do you concentrate well enough? Are people better off for being in this room rather than a different one? And so on. And I think in the end, a lot of architectural concerns would like to have some insight about the nature of well-being and health and happiness in spaces. So that's why I spent so much time on this, because there's something in here. Okay. You want to make a comment?
Oh, thank you so much, David.
Oh, why, thank
Very
you.
interesting position. I have a question about the details of this Biophilic and a difficult question about our general approach. The easy question is about what Gestalt psychologists call expressive qualities. So you see a tree out there through the window, the tree is outside, you're inside, and you see branches of the trees are moving in a particular way, the way very particular to the trees. And, because you know something, you've seen that many times, it's windy, right? You don't feel the wind, but you see particular pattern of motion, and you could even tell something about it, what direction comes from. Those are expressive qualities. So you look at an object, and it moves, it expresses itself. It's a sort of internal structure in a way that manifests something about something else in the growth. So when you think about biophilia, you may ask, maybe we want to use these expressive qualities of natural objects using unnatural materials. Remember, you showed the pattern of the river, like a number of little sort of half pipes, and you have the sound of the river, you have the appearance of movement of the water, you have many qualities of the river, even though there is nothing like the river, there are waterfalls. I don't know if they talk about that in this literature.
I'm, by any means no expert on that, and people are trying to get, I will say, so you're talking about perceiving a property through, let's say, visual modality that has to do with, for instance, the sound of wind, which would be the synesthetic sort of thing, where you perceive something that you know from another modality, or you perceive it and it's got an attribute that is different than, it's a natural attribute. So we could be blind and just talk about seeing the shape of motion, sort of wind-like motion. And we could ask, is seeing wind-like motion a natural attribute? And I think they would agree it's a natural attribute. I don't know if anybody has begun to classify the range of natural attributes that you could identify from one or another modality. But I mean, right, you could do this. You could do this. Here was one more thing. In the same guy, tension restoration theory, not just were there the experiments, but he argued that there were these four big things that the restorative environment should have. And he called them like fascination. It doesn't demand mental effort. And it's got you're attracted to the fascinating. So motion, for instance, the fact that it's not static could make it fascinating, more fascinating. A sense of being away. I don't know that one, but like that's exotic a little bit, right? You like to see different places and stuff. And then extent, sense of being in a large enough place where no boundaries are evident. There's that hypothesis about being in the savannah and stuff that people are supposed to like, unless they have agoraphobia. And then compatibility, which is, how well the content of the environment supports the needs and inclinations of the user. So, you could show me a picture of, way up high in a rock climbing context, and it's as natural as anything can be, and I guarantee I don't want to see it. I'm not keen on that stuff. So, I don't think that's an incompatible one for me. But anyway, so they try, right? They try to get more. All this stuff just makes it harder.
Thank you.
Okay,
There's a difficult question.
yeah, these are all difficult.
No,
Oh, that was the easy question.
That was the easy one.
Okay,
The difficult question, a more general one, has to do with boundaries of science,
boundaries of time.
of science.
Oh, boundaries of science.
Yeah, we live in a society where science is celebrated, scientific is good, and non-scientific is not good. And if you are trained as a scientist in this society, you believe everything is measurable. With your scientific instruments, you could measure and prove or disprove everything. You just need the right instrument. If you don't have it today, you'll have it next year, in 10 years. The counter argument would go that this is not the case. Scientists in society at large need to be trained in the fact that every sort of enterprise, including science, has boundaries. Certain questions are not suitable for the scientific method. So to go very far from natural processes, consider experience of the person reading a novel, right? In the middle of reading, War and Peace, 1,200 pages. You're thinking about a character going through some, interesting experience. It's your experience of the character, and all the context of that experience is something that has no physical counterpart. Now, this is a process that's going on in your brain, but the composition of the novel and the movement of your mind in the novel is not something that needs to be studied using anything that the sciences we're talking about have in their arsenal of tools, cognitive science, neuroscience. Of course, you're using your brain, the blood flows, the neurons are firing on that. But by studying what your brain does, by measuring your galvanic skin response, you will not learn anything about, Natasha Rostova's thinking about the moment, right? So when you go into complexities of this sort, choice of style, less is more, things like that. Do they have anything to do at all with what we talk about in cognitive science, or in neuroscience, in psychology? Maybe we are overreaching a little bit and trying to inject science into something where science has no place.
I will be the devil's advocate. In this case, the devil is science. The imperialism, the overarching arrogance of science. I will defend such a view. So Sergey is presenting a humanist's attack